Captain Wu Jin stared at the massive space station floating in the darkness ahead of his ship. The ancient structure looked like a giant metal flower, its twisted petals made of some strange silver material that seemed to glow with its own light. His crew had been traveling for 3 weeks to reach this place in the Kepler 442 system, following signals that Earth scientists said were very old and very important. "Captain, we're getting close enough to dock," said Dae-Yoon from her position at the engineering controls. She was young for an engineer, only 25, but Wu Jin trusted her completely. Her dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the blue uniform of the Terran Space Fleet with pride. "Any signs of life?" Wu Jin asked. Tae-Ho checked his weapon systems, even though they probably would not need them. The weapons specialist always prepared for trouble, which was why Wu Jin liked having him on the crew. "Nothing moving out there, Captain. Whatever built this place has been gone for a very long time." So-Ra looked up from her science station, her eyes bright with excitement. As the ship's xenobiologist, she studied alien life forms, but she also knew a lot about ancient civilizations. "The readings are amazing, Captain. This station is at least 50,000 years old, maybe older. And it's made from materials we've never seen before." Wu Jin nodded and activated the ship's communication system. "This is Captain Wu Jin of the Terran vessel New Seoul to Earth Command. We have reached the target location and are preparing to board the ancient station. We'll report our findings in 12 hours. The reply came back after a long delay because Earth was so far away. "Understood, New Seoul. Be careful out there. This is the first intact alien structure we've ever found." The docking process took 2 hours because the station's ports were built for ships very different from human vessels. Dae-Yoon had to modify their docking clamps and create new connections for their power systems. Finally, they heard the satisfying sound of metal connecting to metal. "Atmosphere is breathable," So-Ra reported as she checked her instruments. "Oxygen levels are actually higher than Earth normal. Temperature is comfortable. No dangerous bacteria or viruses that I can detect." Wu Jin gathered his team at the airlock. Besides Dae-Yoon, Tae-Ho, and So-Ra, he brought along 2 other crew members, Dong-Su, who was good with computers, and Hana, who could fix almost anything. They all wore light armor and carried emergency equipment. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and they stepped into the alien station. The first thing that struck them was the size. The corridors were huge, at least 4 meters tall and just as wide. The walls were covered in the same silver material as the outside, and they seemed to pulse with a gentle light that made everything visible without being too bright. "Look at these symbols," So-Ra whispered as they walked deeper into the station. The walls were covered in strange markings that looked like a mix of pictures and letters. Some showed stars and planets. Others showed creatures that might have been the builders of this place. They explored for several hours, finding rooms filled with strange equipment and chambers that might have been living quarters for beings much larger than humans. Everything was perfectly preserved, as if the inhabitants had just stepped out for a moment and planned to return soon. Then So-Ra found the crystal chamber dot. It was a round room at the heart of the station, filled with tall crystals that reached from the floor to the ceiling. Each crystal was as thick as a tree trunk and glowed with different colors: blue, green, red, and gold. But what made everyone stop and stare were the symbols carved into the crystals. "These are different from the other markings," So-Ra said, running her scanner over the nearest crystal. "They're much more detailed, and they seem to be telling a story." Dong-Su set up his portable computers and began taking pictures of every symbol. "Captain, there are thousands of these markings. It's going to take me days to copy them all." "Do what you can," Wu Jin said. "So-Ra, can you read any of this?" So-Ra studied the crystals carefully, comparing the symbols to the databases in her computer. She had spent years studying alien languages and had a gift for understanding how different species communicated. After an hour of work, she began to translate some of the simpler symbols. "This word means warning or danger," she said, pointing to a symbol that looked like a star with jagged edges. "And this one means never or do not. This symbol here represents a planet, and this one I think means awaken or disturb." As she worked through more of the text, Sora's face grew serious. "Captain, I think these crystals are telling us about some kind of ancient enemy. The builders of this station, they called themselves the Vorthik, and they were warning future generations about something terrible." Tae-ho checked his weapons again, a habit when he heard about danger. What kind of enemy? Sora continued reading, her voice getting quieter as she understood more of the message. "They call them the Kethmori. According to this, they were beings of great power who conquered many worlds. The Vorthik fought against them, but lost. Before they died, they built these stations to warn others." "What's the warning about?" Wu Jin asked. So-Ra found a large crystal in the center of the chamber and focused her translator on its markings. The symbols here were larger and more detailed than the others. As she read them, her eyes grew wide. "Captain, this is very strange. The warning isn't about the Kethmori coming back. It's warning the Kethmori about something else." She paused, reading the symbols again to make sure she understood correctly. "It's warning them about us, about humans?" Dian asked. "But that's impossible. Humans weren't even in space when this was written." Sora continued translating, her voice filled with wonder. "The Vorthik somehow knew about Earth and humanity. They wrote, 'Never wake the sleeping titans of Sol. Never provoke the children of Terra. They are few, but they are wrath incarnate.'" The team stood in silence, trying to understand what this meant. How could an alien race that died 50,000 years ago know about humans? And why would they warn the Kethmori about Earth? Wu Jin made his decision. Copy everything. Every symbol, every marking, every piece of information we can find. Earth Command needs to see this. They worked for 16 more hours, documenting everything in the crystal chamber and exploring more of the station. In other rooms, they found more warnings about the Kethmori and more references to humanity that seemed impossible but were clearly written in the ancient language. When they finally returned to their ship, Wu Jin sent a detailed report to Earth Command along with all the pictures and translations Sora had made. A message would take weeks to reach Earth, and he knew it would cause quite a stir among the scientists and politicians there. As the new soul departed from the ancient station, Wu Jin looked back at the strange structure floating in space. Something about the Vorthik warnings bothered him, but he could not quite figure out what it was. In his quarters that night, Sora continued working on the translations. She had found more text hidden in the crystal patterns, and what she was reading made her uncomfortable. The Vorthik had not just warned about humanity's power. They had described it in detail. According to the ancient records, the Vorthik had somehow observed humanity's early development. They had watched humans fight wars, survive disasters, and explore dangerous places that other species would avoid. What impressed the Vorthik most was not human technology or strength, but human stubbornness. The final warning was the most detailed. The Terrans appear weak because they choose restraint. They seem few because they need few. We witnessed their first steps into the void and knew these beings do not fight for conquest. They fight for survival. And when survival is threatened, they become something beyond reason, beyond mercy, beyond defeat. Sora decided to keep this translation to herself for now. She would include it in her full report to Earth Command, but something told her that humanity might need this information sooner than anyone expected. Far away, in a distant part of the galaxy, Ancient machines were beginning to wake up after sleeping for thousands of years. The Kethmori Empire was stirring, and soon they would look for new worlds to conquer. The stage was set for the ancient warning to be tested. 3 months had passed since the new Sol returned from the ancient Vorthix station. The discovery had caused excitement among Earth scientists, but most people in the Terran colonies went about their daily lives without thinking much about ancient warnings or long-dead alien races. Admiral Haiyan Wu was reviewing supply reports on his flagship, the Incheon, when the alarm started screaming throughout the ship. The sound made everyone on the bridge stop what they were doing and look at their instruments with growing worry. "Admiral, we have multiple contacts appearing at the edge of the system," reported Lieutenant Yeon Ho from the sensor station. His voice was steady, but Haiyan Wu could hear the tension underneath. "They're big, sir. Really big." "How big?" Haiyan Wu asked, moving to stand behind the sensor operator. "Each ship is approximately 15 kilometers long and 8 kilometers wide. I count 27 vessels in the first wave, with more appearing every few minutes." Haiyan Wu felt his stomach drop. The largest human ship was barely 2 kilometers long, and they had only 30 major vessels in the entire Terran defense fleet. "Are they responding to our communication attempts?" "Negative, sir, but they're broadcasting something on all frequencies. It's not in any human language." Before Haiyan Wu could respond, similar reports came in from all 12 human colonies. Massive alien ships had appeared at the edge of every human system at exactly the same time. This was clearly planned and coordinated on a scale that humanity had never seen before. "Send word to Earth Command immediately," Haiyan Wu ordered, "and get me Captain Minho and Captain Yunji on secure channels." Within minutes, he was talking to the commanders of the destroyers Han River and Sejong, the only other major Terran warships in the system. Captain Minho was a veteran pilot who had served in the asteroid mining conflicts, and Captain Yunji was one of the youngest ship commanders in the fleet, but had proven herself during several rescue missions. "What do you think, Minho?" Haiyan Wu asked. "I think we're about to find out if those ancient warnings were real," Minho replied grimly. "These ships match some of the descriptions from the Vorthek records." Captain Unji's voice came through, clearly despite the distance. "Admiral, my sensors are picking up energy readings unlike anything in our databases. Whatever these ships are powered by, it's far beyond our technology." Before anyone could respond, the alien ships began moving toward the inner system. They moved slowly, but with purpose, maintaining perfect formation as they approached the human colonies. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," reported Communications Officer Ju-Won. "It's being broadcast to all human ships and colonies simultaneously. Put it on the main screen." The bridge's main display flickered, and then showed an image that made everyone take a step back. The being on the screen was tall and thin, with pale skin that seemed to shimmer like metal. Her face was angular and sharp, with large eyes that glowed with an inner light. She wore armor that seemed to move and shift like liquid, and behind her, Haiyan Wu could see other similar beings operating. Strange controls. When she spoke, her voice was perfectly clear in standard human language. "Primitive mammals of the Sol system," she began, her tone cold and commanding. "I am Supreme Overlord Valfara of the Kethmori hegemony. Your species has been evaluated and found suitable for our purposes." Haiyan Wu activated his communication system. "This is Admiral Haiyan Wu of the Terran Defense Fleet. We greet you in peace and hope we can establish friendly relations between our peoples." Valfara looked directly at him through the screen, and her expression did not change. "You will surrender your worlds and your population to serve the Kethmori Empire. Your technologies will be absorbed into our databases. Your strongest individuals will be used as labor on our construction projects. Your remaining population will serve as a food source for our bioforms. The bridge went completely silent. Everyone stared at the screen, trying to process what they had just heard. "I'm sorry," Haiyan Wu said slowly, "but did you just say you want to use humans as food? Your species shows adequate nutritional value, according to our preliminary scans," Velthara replied, as if she were discussing the weather. "However, your primary value lies in your reproductive capacity and your resistance to various environmental conditions. You will prove useful as livestock." Captain Minho's voice came through the communication system, and he sounded angry. "Admiral, did this thing just call us livestock?" Velthara turned her attention to the new voice. "You will cease all communications except to confirm your surrender. Resistance is futile and will result in the complete elimination of your species." Haiyan Wu took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. Everything in his training told him to attempt diplomacy, to find some way to avoid conflict. "Overlord Velthara, surely we can find some arrangement that benefits both our species. Humanity has much to offer as allies rather than subjects." "You misunderstand the nature of this interaction," Velthara said. "This is not a negotiation. This is a declaration of conquest. Your species will comply or be eliminated." To demonstrate her point, Velthara gestured to someone off-screen. On the tactical display, Haiyan Wu watched in horror as one of the alien ship's powered-up weapon systems, unlike anything humanity had ever built. The target was the colony transport Bison, a massive ship carrying 3,000 civilians to establish a new mining operation in the outer system. The ship had no weapons and no military value whatsoever. "Overlord, that ship carries only civilians, including families with children," Haiyan Wu said urgently. "There's no military threat there." "Precisely," Velthara replied. "This demonstration will show you the futility of resistance." The alien weapon fired. It was not like the energy beams or projectiles that human weapons used. Instead, it looked like a wave of dark energy that washed over the Bison in a few seconds. When the energy passed, the ship was simply gone. Not destroyed, not broken apart, but completely vaporized, as if it had never existed. 3,000 human lives had just been erased in an instant. The bridge of the engine was so quiet that Haiyan Wu could hear his own heartbeat. He looked around at his crew and saw the same expression on every face: shock, horror, and growing anger. "You have 72 hours to surrender unconditionally," Velthara continued. "During this time, you may contemplate the wisdom of compliance. After 72 hours, we will begin the systematic elimination of all human colonies, starting with your most populated worlds." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in terrible silence. "Admiral," Captain Yunji's voice came through the communication system, and she sounded shaky. "Did we just watch 3,000 people die?" "Yes," Haiyan Wu said quietly. "And if we don't surrender, we're going to watch billions more die." But even as he said it, Haiyan Wu knew that surrender was not really an option. Beketh Mori had made it clear that they saw humans as animals to be farmed and eaten. Surrender would not save humanity. It would just mean a slower death. "Sir," said Lieutenant Eon Ho, "I'm receiving reports from all our colonies. Every system has received the same ultimatum. Earth Command is calling for an emergency session of the Terran Council." "How many ships do we have in total?" Haiyan Wu asked. 847 vessels of all classes, including cargo ships and transports. Of those, only 96 are actual warships, against 50,000 alien vessels that could vaporize ships instantly. The mathematics of the situation were clear, and they were terrible. "Admiral," Captain Minho said over the communication channel, "what are your orders?" Haiyan Wu looked at his crew, at the young faces of people who had joined the Terran defense. "Fleet to protect humanity from pirates and asteroids. not to fight an impossible war against aliens from beyond the galaxy. Signal all ships to maintain position, but prepare for combat, he said finally, and send a message to Earth Command. Tell them that the ancient warnings were real, and we need to prepare for war. As his crew scrambled to carry out his orders, Haiyan Wu thought about the Vorthic message that So-Ra had translated. The ancient aliens had warned the Kethmori never to provoke humanity, but the Kethmori clearly had not received the message, or perhaps they had received it and chosen to ignore it. Over the next 72 hours, humanity would have to decide whether the ancient warnings had any truth to them. Admiral Haiyan Wu had a feeling they were about to find out what happened when someone ignored 50,000 years of good advice. On Earth, President Ji-hai was already calling emergency meetings with every government and military leader in human space. The Terran defense fleet was small and outgunned, but it was not defenseless. More importantly, humanity was not defenseless. The Kethmori had made a serious mistake when they killed the civilians on the Bizan. They had just shown humanity exactly what kind of enemy they were dealing with, and exactly what would happen to every human in the galaxy if the aliens won. Valthara had given humanity 72 hours to surrender. She should have given them 72 hours to prepare. President Ji-hai had not slept in 48 hours. The emergency session of the Terran High Command had been going non-stop since the first reports of the alien fleet arrived, and the news kept getting worse with each update. "Tell me again, how many ships they have," she said to General Dong Haiyan, her voice hoarse from hours of discussion and debate. The general looked tired but spoke clearly. "Our best estimates put the Kethmori fleet at over 50,000 vessels, with more arriving every hour. Each of their ships is larger and more powerful than anything in our fleet." Colonel Sung Min, who commanded the Terran Marine Corps, added his own grim assessment. "Our ground forces are in similar shape, Madam President. We have excellent soldiers, but they're equipped to fight human opponents, not aliens with technology we don't understand." Major Hai Jin, the youngest officer in the room but one of the smartest, had been studying the tactical reports from all 12 human systems. "The real problem isn't just their numbers or technology," she said. "It's coordination. They appeared at every human system at exactly the same moment, despite being separated by hundreds of light years. That level of coordination suggests technology far beyond anything we have." President Ji-hai rubbed her temples and tried to think. The mathematics were clear. Humanity could not win a conventional war against the Kethmori, even if every human ship performed perfectly and destroyed multiple alien vessels. The numbers were simply too overwhelming. "What about evacuation?" asked Dr. J1, the xenorchaeologist who had been called in to provide insight into the alien threat. "Could we move our population to systems outside Kethmori space?" "Negative," replied General Dong Haiyan. "We have reports that Kethmori forces are spreading throughout this entire region of the galaxy. Even if we could evacuate 12 billion people, which would take years, there's nowhere to go." The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the impossible situation. Then President Ji-hai remembered something from the initial reports about the Vorthic discovery. "Dr. J1, you've been studying the alien warnings that Captain Wu Jin's team found. Is there anything in those records that might help us?" Dr. J1 looked uncomfortable. "Madam President, most of the Vorthic warnings were about not provoking the Kethmori. Unfortunately, it appears we've moved past that point. But there were warnings about us too, weren't there? About humanity?" "Yes, but those warnings were directed at the Kethmori, telling them not to attack Earth. Since they've clearly ignored those warnings, I'm not sure how helpful they are." President Ji-hai stood up and walked to the large window that looked out over Earth's capital city. Millions of people were going about their daily lives, unaware that they had less than 24 hours before an alien empire decided their fate. Dr. J1, I want you to re-examine those warnings. Take your entire team and go through every symbol, every translation, everything. If the Vorthik knew something about humanity that made them warn the Kethmori, I want to know what it was. Yes, Madam President. Should I work with the linguistics team? Take whoever you need. Major Hyjin, I want you to work with them. You have a good tactical mind, and you might see something the archaeologists miss. As Dr. J1 and Major Hyjin left to begin their urgent research, President Ji-hai turned back to the military leaders. General, I need options. Any options. General Dong Hyeon activated the room's main display, showing the positions of human and alien forces throughout known space. We have 3 possible strategies, none of them good. First, we could scatter our forces and try to conduct guerrilla warfare from hidden bases. Second, we could concentrate everything in one system and try to make the aliens pay as high a price as possible for their victory. Third, we could surrender and hope they keep their word about using us as livestock, instead of just killing everyone. What do you recommend? Honestly, I think we're going to lose no matter what we do. But if we're going to lose, I'd rather we make them remember it. President Ji-hai nodded slowly. That matched her own thinking, but she needed to be sure before committing humanity to what would essentially be a fight to the death. 6 hours later, Dr. J1 and Major Hyjin returned with news that changed everything. Madam President, Dr. J1 said, we found additional text hidden in the crystal patterns. The Vorthik used quantum encryption to hide their most important messages, and we almost missed it. Linguist Yu Na, who had worked with So-Ra on the original translations, stepped forward. The hidden message is much more detailed than what we found initially. The Vorthik didn't just observe humanity. They studied us for thousands of years. What did they learn? President Ji-hai asked. Major Hyjin answered. They learned that humans are different from every other species they had encountered. Most intelligent species, when faced with overwhelming odds, will either fight until they reach a certain casualty percentage and then surrender, or they'll calculate their chances and surrender immediately. And humans? Humans don't surrender when they're fighting for survival. Yun-Ah said, reading from her translation notes. Vorthik observed human history and saw that we fought hopeless battles for thousands of years. Sometimes we lose, but we never stop fighting until we're all dead or we win. Dr. J1 activated his portable display and showed the complete Vorthik warning. Here's the full text. The Terrans appear weak because they choose restraint. They seem few because they need few. We witnessed their first steps into the void and knew these beings do not fight for conquest. They fight for survival. And when survival is threatened, they become something beyond reason, beyond mercy, beyond defeat. President Ji-hai read the translation again. Beyond reason, beyond mercy, beyond defeat. What does that mean? Major Hyjin had been thinking about this question for hours. I think it means that when humans are fighting for survival, we don't follow normal military logic. We don't calculate acceptable losses or consider surrender as an option. We just keep fighting until we either win or die trying. The Vorthik also noted something else, Dr. J1 added. They observed that humans fight differently when they're angry. Most species become less effective when they're emotional, but humans become more dangerous. Colonel Sung-min, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. That matches what I've seen in combat situations. When soldiers get angry about something, especially when their friends are killed, they stop worrying about their own safety and start taking risks that would normally be considered insane. President Ji-hai thought about the 3,000 civilians who had died on the Bizen. The Kethmori had killed them to demonstrate their power and discourage resistance. But what if the demonstration had had the opposite effect? How much time do we have left? She asked. 18 hours, General Dong Haiyan replied. I want to address all human colonies simultaneously, President Ji Hai said. Set up the quantum communication network for full broadcast. What are you going to tell them? President Ji Hai looked around the room at the faces of humanity's military and scientific leaders. They were tired, scared, and facing an impossible situation. But there was something else in their expressions that she recognized: determination. I'm going to tell them the truth, she said, that we're facing an enemy that wants to turn us into livestock, that we're outnumbered 50,000 to 1. That conventional military thinking says we can't win. Madam President, General Dong Haiyan said carefully, that might cause panic. No, President Ji Hai replied. It's going to make them angry. And according to the Vorthik, that's when humans become most dangerous. 12 hours later, President Ji Hai stood before the quantum communication array that would broadcast her message to every human colony simultaneously. Behind her, the flags of Earth in all 12 colonial worlds hung in silent rows. Her speech was short and simple. My fellow humans, an alien empire called the Kethmori has given us an ultimatum: surrender and become their slaves and food, or be destroyed. They killed 3,000 innocent civilians to show us their power. They think we will be frightened into submission. They think we will calculate the odds and surrender like reasonable beings. They don't understand humans very well. We are not reasonable when someone threatens our families. We are not logical when someone tries to make us slaves. We are not civilized when someone treats us like animals. They want to make us livestock. Show them what happens when you corner a predator. The broadcast ended, and President Ji Hai returned to the command center to wait for the Kethmori deadline dot. She did not have to wait long for a response. Within an hour, reports came in from every human colony. No one was surrendering. Instead, civilian volunteers were joining military units. Factories were converting to weapons production, and ships were being modified for combat. The Kethmori had given humanity 72 hours to surrender. Instead, they had given humanity 72 hours to get angry dot as the deadline approached. President Ji Hai received one final message from Admiral Haiyan Wu. All human forces ready for combat. Awaiting orders. She looked around the command center one last time, then activated the communication system. This is President Ji Hai to all human forces. The Kethmori deadline has expired. They want a war. Give them one they'll never forget. The attack began exactly 72 hours after the Kethmori ultimatum, just as Supreme Overlord Velthara had promised. She expected the primitive humans to fold quickly once they saw the true power of her empire. What she got instead was something that would haunt the Kethmori for generations. Captain Wu Jin watched the massive alien fleet approach his position near the asteroid belt of the Kepler 442 system. His ship, the New Soul, was badly outgunned and outnumbered, but he had no intention of running away. Behind him, the mining colony of New Bizan held 40,000 civilians, including families with young children. Captain, Dayun reported. From her engineering station, I've finished the modifications you requested. The reactor is now set to overload on your command. And the escape pods? Wu Jin asked. All loaded with civilians from the mining station. They're already heading for the jump point. Taeho checked his weapons one last time. Captain, we've got maybe 5 minutes before they're in range. The odds aren't good. The odds were never good, Wu Jin replied calmly. But we're not here to win. We're here to buy time and send a message. He activated the ship's communication system and broadcast on all frequencies, including the ones the Kethmori were monitoring. This is Captain Wu Jin of the Terran vessel. New Soul to the Kethmori fleet. You want our worlds? "Come and take them." The response was immediate. A massive Kethmori dreadnought, easily 10 times the size of the new Sol, powered up its main weapons and fired. The dark energy beam that had destroyed the Bizan lanced toward the human ship. Wu Jin had studied the recordings of that attack. He knew the beam traveled in a straight line and took several seconds to reach its target. At the last moment, he ordered Dae-yoon to overload the ship's maneuvering thrusters. The new Sol shot forward like a bullet, diving directly toward the Kethmori flagship instead of trying to escape. The alien beam missed by hundreds of meters, passing harmlessly through empty space. "All power to engines," Wu Jin ordered. "Dae-yoon, prepare the reactor overload." "Captain, if we ram them, we'll be vaporized on impact," Tae-ho said. "I know," Wu Jin replied, "but look at their ship design. All those weapon systems are on the outer hull, and they've never fought anyone crazy enough to ram them. We hit their main engine cluster, and that big ship isn't going anywhere for a while." The Kethmori tried to target the tiny human vessel racing toward them, but their massive weapons were designed to hit large targets at long range. The new Sol was too small and moving too fast for their targeting systems to track effectively. The last second, Wu Jin activated the ship's communication system one more time. "Dae-yoon, trigger the overload. For humanity." The new Sol slammed into the Kethmori flagship's engine section and exploded with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The blast tore a massive hole in the alien ship's hull and sent it spinning out of control. Captain Wu Jin and his crew were gone, but they had just taught the Kethmori their first lesson about human warfare. Humans were willing to trade their lives to damage the enemy. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out as the Kethmori encountered human forces for the first time. Every battle followed the same pattern. Humans were outgunned and outnumbered, but they refused to surrender or retreat. Captain Min Ho commanded the destroyer Han River in a hopeless battle against 6 Kethmori cruisers. When his weapons failed and his engines were damaged, he did not try to escape. Instead, he rammed his ship into the nearest alien vessel, destroying both ships and taking 300 Kethmori with him. Captain Yoon-ji, commanding the Sejong, found herself facing impossible odds when a dozen alien ships surrounded her vessel. Rather than surrender, she flew her ship directly into an asteroid field and triggered a series of explosions that buried half the alien fleet under tons of rock and metal. The pattern was repeated hundreds of times. Across human space, human ships would fight until their weapons were gone, then use themselves as missiles. Human ground forces would battle until their ammunition ran out, and continue fighting with improvised weapons made from mining equipment and construction tools. What disturbed the Kethmori most was that humans seemed to coordinate their desperate tactics without any central command. When Admiral Hyun-woo's flagship was destroyed in the defense of Mars, Colonel Sung-min immediately took command of the remaining fleet and launched a counterattack that cost the Kethmori 12 capital ships. On the surface of New Terra, Major Hyjin led a force of 300 Marines against a Kethmori landing force of 5,000. When her troops ran out of ammunition, she organized the local civilians to continue the fight using construction equipment as weapons. Mining lasers became artillery, cargo haulers became armored vehicles, and chemical processing plants became weapon factories. The Kethmori had fought many wars of conquest over the millennia, but they had never encountered anything like human resistance. Most species, when faced with overwhelming force, would either surrender immediately or fight until casualties reached 20 to 30%, then seek terms for surrender. Humans fought until they were all dead. Engineer Dae-yoon, who had somehow survived the destruction of the new Sol in an escape pod, found herself on a mining station under attack. Instead of hiding, she used her knowledge of human technology to turn the station's refinery into a massive bomb. When Keth Mori forces boarded the station, she triggered the explosion manually, taking out an entire alien regiment. What made the situation even more confusing for the Keth Mori was that humans seemed to get more dangerous as they got angrier. Dr. Sora, the xenobiologist from the New Sol, had made it to safety on New Bizon. When Keth Mori forces attacked the civilian colony, she organized the scientists and engineers to create improvised weapons using their research equipment the aliens found. Themselves facing biological weapons made from modified bacteria, chemical explosives created from mining supplies, and traps that used industrial machinery to crush or incinerate anyone who triggered them. This is not how conquest works, Supreme Overlord Velthara told her war council as reports of impossible human resistance poured in from every battlefront. These mammals should have surrendered by now. Their casualties are approaching 60%, but they're still fighting. Her tactical advisor, Commander Zekran, studied the battle reports with growing confusion. Supreme Overlord, our own casualties are approaching 20%. This primitive species is somehow inflicting significant damage on our forces. How is that possible? Our technology is thousands of years more advanced than theirs. They're not fighting with technology, Supreme Overlord. They're fighting with tactics we've never encountered. They use their own ships as weapons. They turn civilian infrastructure into military assets. And they refuse to retreat even when victory is impossible. Velthara watched a tactical display showing the battle for the human colony of New Sol. 3 Keth Mori divisions had landed on the planet 3 days ago, expecting quick victory. Instead, they were bogged down in brutal urban warfare against human defenders who seemed to appear from nowhere, strike without warning, and disappear before retaliation was possible. They're using the city itself as a weapon, Commander Zekran explained. They've turned the subway tunnels into a transportation network for their forces. They're using building-to-building bridges as sniper positions, and they've somehow weaponized the power grid to electrocute our troops. What about their military command structure? Eliminate their leaders, and the resistance should collapse. That's the problem, Supreme Overlord. They don't seem to have a traditional command structure. When we kill their officers, other humans immediately take command. When we destroy their communication systems, they continue coordinating somehow. It's as if every human is capable of independent command. For the first time since awakening from her long sleep, Velthara felt something she had not experienced in millennia: doubt. The Keth Mori Empire had conquered 1,000 worlds, but they had never faced resistance like this. What are our total losses? She asked. 15,000 ships destroyed or damaged, approximately 2 million ground troops killed or missing. And we've lost control of 3 planetary assault zones. Velthara stared at the numbers in disbelief. In 2 weeks of fighting, a species with only 12 worlds had inflicted casualties that most galactic empires could not manage in years of warfare. How many humans have we killed? Approximately 40 million. And how many are still fighting? Commander Zekran checked his reports. All of them Supreme Overlord. Every human colony is still resisting. Every ship that can fly is still fighting. Even the civilians are participating in the war effort. For the first time, Velthara began to understand why the ancient Vorthik had warned against provoking humanity. These beings did not fight wars like civilized species. They turned war into something personal, something that involved every member of their society. The Keth Mori had expected to fight the human military and then accept the surrender of the civilian population. Instead, they found themselves fighting every human in the galaxy, and those humans seemed to view death in battle as preferable to surrender. On the tactical display, another Keth Mori task force reported heavy losses to human defenders who had somehow turned a civilian transport into a guided missile capable After 4 weeks of brutal warfare, Supreme Overlord Velthara stood in her command chamber, staring at reports that made no sense. The Kethmori Empire had lost nearly 40% of their invasion fleet to a species that should have been conquered in a matter of days. Explain to me again how we have lost 18,000 ships to primitives, she said to Commander Zekran, her voice cold with barely controlled rage. Supreme Overlord, the humans do not fight according to any recognized tactical doctrine. They use their entire civilization as a weapon. Every human we encounter, military or civilian, treats this as a war for survival rather than a territorial dispute. Velthara activated the tactical display showing the current battle for Earth's moon. 3 Kethmori divisions were attempting to secure what should have been an easy target. But human defenders had somehow turned the lunar mining operation into a fortress that had held for 6 days. They're using mining charges as artillery, Commander Zekran explained. They've turned the underground tunnels into a maze that our forces cannot navigate effectively. And they've somehow modified the gravity generators to create tactical advantages. What about the main assault on Earth itself? Delayed indefinitely, Supreme Overlord. The humans have established orbital defenses, using their own destroyed ships as obstacles. Every approach vector is covered by weapons platforms they've built from civilian technology. Before Velthara could respond, an urgent communication came in from the outer system. Supreme Overlord, we have a problem. The humans have activated some kind of ancient beacon, and it's broadcasting a signal across the galaxy. The main display changed to show Dr. Jaewon and Yuna working frantically in an underground facility on Earth's moon. They had discovered that the Vorthek had hidden more than just warnings in their ruins. They had left behind a galaxy-wide communication system designed to activate in case the Kethmori ever returned. What is that beacon transmitting? Velthara demanded. We're not sure, Supreme Overlord. The signal is encrypted using technology we don't understand. But we're detecting responses from locations across the galaxy. As the Kethmori tried to understand what was happening, ancient defense systems that had been sleeping for 50,000 years began to wake up throughout the galaxy. The Vorthek and other extinct civilizations had left behind automated weapons platforms, hidden in asteroid fields and dead systems, programmed to activate if the Kethmori ever resumed their conquest. Within hours, Kethmori forces throughout the galaxy found themselves under attack by weapons that had been built specifically to destroy them. The ancient systems were designed and built by species who had studied Kethmori technology for thousands of years before being conquered. But the beacon did something else that was even more important. It broadcast the story of human resistance to every intelligent species in the galaxy. The message was simple. The Terrans have been awakened. All who value their existence will aid them or flee. For the first time in millennia, species that the Kethmori had conquered began to rebel. The example of human resistance had shown them something they had forgotten, that survival was sometimes worth any price, even death. On Kethmori-controlled worlds throughout the galaxy, slave populations rose in revolt. They had watched the broadcasts of human resistance and learned that it was possible to fight back against their conquerors, even when victory seemed impossible. The rebellion spread faster than the Kethmori could respond. Worlds that had been peaceful for thousands of years suddenly erupted in violence as enslaved populations turned mining equipment into weapons and civilian infrastructure into fortifications. Supreme Overlord, Commander Zekron reported with growing alarm. We're receiving reports of uprisings on over 3,000 worlds. Our occupation forces are being overwhelmed. Velthara could not believe what she was hearing. Impossible. Those populations have been enslaved for millennia. They've never shown any sign of resistance. The humans have changed that, Supreme Overlord. Their example is spreading across the galaxy. Species that have been passive for thousands of years. are suddenly fighting with the same intensity as the Terrans. On the display, Velthara watched footage of the battle for New Sol, where human defenders had held off Kethmori forces for 3 weeks using nothing but determination and improvised weapons. The image of Major Hai-Jin leading a charge of civilian volunteers against Kethmori war machines had become a symbol of resistance across the galaxy. "How many ships do we have left?" Velthara asked. 31,000 vessels, Supreme Overlord. But they're scattered across the galaxy, trying to suppress rebellions. Many of our forces are trapped on planets where the local populations have turned hostile. For the first time in her long life, Velthara began to understand what the Vorthic warnings had really meant. Humans were not dangerous because of their technology or their numbers. They were dangerous because they could inspire others to fight impossible battles. The Kethmori had awakened something in the galaxy that had been sleeping since their last conquest 50,000 years ago. The knowledge that freedom was worth dying for. Supreme Overlord. Another communication came in, this one from the fleet attacking Mars. The humans have launched some kind of counterattack. They're using converted civilian ships as bombers, and they're targeting our command vessels specifically. Velthara watched as a human cargo hauler, modified with mining charges and piloted by a volunteer crew, rammed directly into a Kethmori command ship. The explosion took out the entire alien tactical network for that battle group. They're not trying to win battles, she realized suddenly. They're trying to make us lose the war. Every human tactic was designed not to achieve military victory, but to inflict maximum damage on Kethmori forces and inspire resistance in others. When President Jihai led the final defense of Earth's orbital stations, she broadcast her charge across the galaxy for everyone to see. For humanity. She shouted as her improvised fleet of civilian ships attacked the Kethmori task force. For freedom. For everyone who refuses to live as slaves. The battle was hopeless from a tactical standpoint, but it was broadcast to every world in the galaxy. Billions of enslaved beings watched humans sacrifice themselves to defend their freedom. And many of them decided that freedom was worth the same sacrifice. Within 6 months, the Kethmori Empire was fighting rebellion on 5,000 worlds simultaneously. Ancient defense systems continued to attack their forces, and human resistance had evolved from desperate last stands to organized guerrilla warfare. Captain Te-Ho, who had somehow survived the destruction of multiple ships, now commanded a mixed fleet of human vessels and alien ships crewed by rebels from a dozen different species. His tactics had been copied throughout the galaxy. Hit hard, inflict maximum damage, and inspire others to join the fight. The final blow came when Dr. Sora, working with xenobiologists from freed worlds, developed a virus that could shut down Kethmori biotechnology. The virus spread through their fleet faster than they could contain it, disabling ships and weapons across the galaxy. Velthara found herself trapped on her flagship with a handful of loyal troops while her empire collapsed around her. Human ships, supported by vessels from dozens of freed worlds, surrounded her position. The communication came from President Jihai herself, speaking from the bridge of the rebuilt Terran flagship New Sol. Supreme Overlord Velthara, this is President Jihai of the Terran Federation. Your empire is finished. Surrender now, and we will guarantee safe passage for your remaining forces. Velthara appeared on the screen, her armor cracked and her forces defeated. For the first time, she looked truly alien to the humans watching, not because of her appearance, but because of the fear in her eyes. "We withdraw," she said, her voice filled with something humans had never heard from her before. "We understand now why the ancient races warned against your kind. You do not fight wars. You become war itself." "You're right," President Jihai replied. "When you threaten our survival, we don't just fight back. We make sure that everyone in the galaxy knows that freedom is possible, no matter how impossible the odds seem." The Kethmori fleet began its retreat. leaving behind an empire that had ruled for millennia, but would never recover from the lesson humanity had taught the galaxy. 6 months later, Captain Tay-Ho stood on the bridge of the New Sol as it patrolled the borders of what was now called the Free Worlds Alliance. Humanity's 12 worlds had become the center of a coalition that included thousands of former Kethmori slaves. Ambassador So-Ra worked with representatives from hundreds of species, helping them establish governments based on the principle that had driven human resistance, that some things were worth any sacrifice to defend. Dr. J1 continued studying the Vorthek ruins, but now he had help from archaeologists and historians from across the galaxy. Together, they were learning that humanity was not the first species to possess the stubborn refusal to accept defeat, but they were the first to use that quality to inspire an entire galaxy. On Earth, in the museum built to honor those who had died in the war, a simple inscription was carved in stone in 100 different languages. Here dwells humanity. Approach with respect, or do not approach at all. The galaxy had learned the lesson that the Kethmori had ignored.